Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends, and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed. Get ready for 5 of the most disturbing true Texas horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing, and by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. Hector Alvarez had always believed some things should be left unsolved. Not because they couldn't be, but because the truth, once dug up, had a way of digging back. He learned that lesson the hard way, out on Highway 4, past the last gas station and the whispering cane fields, where the Gulf wind picked up speed and silence began to stretch like old leather. They called it Dead Man's Curve now, but back in 1992 it was just a sharp bend in the road, a place where you slowed down, flipped on your high beams, and prayed the potholes hadn't gotten worse. People had taken it hundreds of times. Teenagers racing toward Boca Chica Beach, truckers heading east before sunrise, border agents patrolling back roads with one hand on their radios. Then came the Martin family. It was a Thursday night, October 29th, 1992. Hector still remembered the phone call, dispatcher's voice tight, scared. Said a woman called in from a payphone near the SpaceX fence line. Back then it was just empty fields, claiming she saw a red Suburban veer off the curve. Full speed, no brake lights. By the time Hector got there, nothing. No skid marks, no broken guardrail, no glass, no blood, no sign of a crash. Just an empty silence, and that feeling. The one that sticks to your back like wet clothing. A whisper you can't shake. A wrongness too deep to name. The Martins were a nice family. Greg Martin was a junior high principal in Harlingen. His wife, Tricia, taught Sunday school. Their kids, Josh and Ellie, were 8 and 5. Good kids, smiling kids. They were never found, not a trace. Local news ran it for weeks. Search parties came and went. Divers were sent into nearby canals. State police got involved, then the feds. But after 6 months, the case dried up like a bone in the desert sun. Hector filed it away. Cold case. Life moved on, sort of. But every year on October 29th, the same thing happened. Headlights on the curve. The first time he thought it was grief. He'd gone out to the scene alone that night, a flask of whiskey in his coat, sitting in his cruiser as the sky bruised with midnight. That was when he saw them. Twin beams in the distance flickering through the cane. At first, it was relief. Someone was out there, maybe a late-night driver. But then the lights never finished the turn. They hit the curve and vanished. Gone. Just like the Martins. He ran to the spot, heart hammering in his throat. Nothing. No car, no taillights, no tire tracks, no sound, just wind. And that terrible, awful silence again. He never told anyone, not then, but it happened the next year, and the next, and every year after that, like clockwork. October 29th, somewhere around 11:47 p.m., the lights would appear, slow and steady, and then vanish halfway through the bend. He started writing it down in a notebook, times, weather, phases of the moon. Always the same pattern, always the same curve. By 2002, he retired, sold his cruiser, moved to a smaller house on the edge of town. But still, every year he went back. sat in his beat-up Ford truck with the engine off and the lights out, watching, waiting. The locals joked about it, called him Ghost Cop, said he was chasing shadows and memories. Maybe he was, but the worst part wasn't the lights. The worst part came in 2013. That was the year he heard the scream. It was faint, high-pitched like a child. It echoed out of nowhere just as the headlights disappeared. One scream, short, sharp, and then dead quiet. It broke him. He didn't go back the next year or the year after. For a while he tried drinking it away, then praying it away. But the guilt never left. Neither did the dreams. He'd see their faces, Trisha's open mouth mid-scream, Josh's tiny hands on the window, Ellie clutching a teddy bear soaked in seawater. Over and over, every time he closed his eyes. Now it was 2022, 30 years to the day. Hector was 71. He sat on his porch, shotgun across his lap, heart full of ghosts. He wasn't sure why he still waited. Maybe he wanted to see them one more time. Maybe he thought if he watched closely enough, he could stop it, save them. At 11:46 p.m., the air turned cold. The crickets stopped chirping. A thick, unnatural stillness fell across the land. And then the headlights came. Bright, steady, same angle, same path. They drifted through the curve like a ghost ship through fog. Hector stood up, trembling. The scream started again, louder this time. But this time he heard something else behind it. A low, grinding voice. Not human, not natural. It said, "You watched, you did nothing." The light flared, bright as fire, and then blinked out, and something stood in the road where the lights had been. It wasn't a man. Tall, twisted. Its face was a mash of stretched skin and glowing eyes. Antlers curled from its skull like blackened tree roots. The thing smiled, not with its mouth, but with its whole body. A slow, swaying grin made of presence. Hector dropped to his knees. The thing didn't speak again. It didn't need to, because Hector understood now. He hadn't just failed to solve the case, he was part of it. Back in 1992, he had cut corners, ignored calls. He'd been tired, hungover, had a fight with his wife. When the dispatcher said there was a report of a vehicle heading too fast around the curve, he said, "They're probably just joyriding. I'll check it in the morning." By morning, they were gone. He hadn't told anyone, not then, not ever. The devil didn't need horns and fire, just apathy, delay, 1 minute too late. The next morning, they found Hector's truck parked on the side of the road. Driver's door open, lights off, radio playing static, no sign of Hector, just his old sheriff badge on the driver's seat, and a note scrawled on the back of a gas receipt. "I saw them, I heard them. They screamed for help, I didn't answer. Now it's my turn." They searched for weeks, never found a body. But the curve? They say it's worse now. Locals hear whispers when they drive past it. And every year, October 29th, 11:47 p.m., the headlights return. Sometimes 2 sets. You ever stood out on the Llano Estacado after dark? I'm not talking about the outskirts of Lubbock, where there's always a porch light or the hum of an old Chevy rolling down the road. I mean the real West Texas, where the dirt turns red and flat and the sky stretches wide enough to swallow your name. Out there you can scream and no one hears you, but the wind, and the wind don't give a damn. The Tres Cruces Ranch sat out there, 30 miles northwest of nowhere, halfway between a dried-up creek and a ridgeline nobody bothered to name. It used to be a big operation once, back in the 1950s, maybe earlier, but by the time the story I'm about to tell took place, the only thing fat on that land were the rattlesnakes. Still, a man named Clay Harmon ran the place, third-generation rancher, tough as boot leather with a face like dried bark and eyes that had seen too much. Clay didn't believe in ghost stories, no matter what the hands whispered over the fire at night. But he should have. because something worked that land, something not of this world. The first time Clay noticed it, it was late August. One of his steers came in with a fresh brand, a strange one, burned deep into the hide like a twisted spiral. Didn't look like any ranch brand in the state. And Clay knew them all. Looked more like some old Indian symbol, or maybe a glyph dug out of the earth. He was pissed. Thought some local punks had come through messing around. But the edges of the brand were too precise, too clean. And the thing was, nobody heard a damn thing. They put up cameras, motion sensors. Hell, even had Miguel, Clay's foreman, sit out on the porch with a shotgun and a thermos of black coffee for 3 nights straight. Night 4, Miguel came in pale as milk. Said he saw a man out in the field, walking slow between the herd. Tall fella, Miguel whispered, too tall, hat low, shoulders wrong, like they weren't lined up right. Clay asked him if he shouted, if he fired a warning shot. Miguel shook his head, said his hands wouldn't move, like they were pinned to his knees. By September, more cattle showed up with the mark. Some were just calves, barely a week old, branded like they'd been pulled into hell and spat back out. And then there were the sounds. One hand swore he heard whistling out by the barn, not the kind you do when you're happy, but a slow, tuneless moan, like a dying song. Another said he saw hoofprints that led nowhere, deep, sharp tracks in dry dirt, circling the fence line before vanishing. And always, always, that smell, burnt hair, sulfur, old leather. One night, Clay finally saw it himself. He'd been out checking on a sick heifer when he looked up and saw a figure at the far edge of the corral. Not moving, just standing, tall as the damn gatepost, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, long coat that barely moved in the wind, no flashlight, no horse. Clay called out, "Hey, you lost!" No answer. The figure turned, slow and jerky, like a puppet on rusty wires. Clay felt his breath catch, his knees buckled, because there were no eyes, just empty, shining sockets, like burnt-out headlights in a skull too long buried. And the thing raised its hand. Not a hand, really, more like a branding iron glowing red-hot. Then it was gone, vanished, like smoke in the night. Clay never talked about it again, but he started sleeping with the lights on, kept his dogs inside, burned sage and salt around the bunkhouse like some old Mexican bruja. Didn't matter, the brands kept coming. By October, he lost 12 head, all marked, all drained of blood, but without a single wound. Like something had fed off them, spiritually, if not physically. The ranch closed down the next spring. Clay just walked away, left everything behind. Tools, papers, even his father's boots on the porch. He said the land wasn't his anymore. Said the devil had hired himself a new ranch hand. These days, the Tres Cruces Ranch is nothing but rotted wood and wind-blown dust. Teens sneak out there sometimes, dare each other to spend a night in the barn. Some make it till morning, some don't. But the ones who do always say the same thing. There's someone still working the land, branding things in the dark, things that scream when they burn. Sometimes the world isn't really all that quiet. Sometimes it's the silence that carries the loudest things. Maggie Preston knew that better than most. She was a photographer, not the fancy kind with portfolios or exhibitions, but the kind that lived for the real moments, the broken things, the lost things. That was what pulled her to the desert town of Marfa. She'd heard about the Marfa lights, of course, but she wasn't interested in the touristy rumors or the sterile explanations. No, Maggie was after something deeper, something real, something that could capture the ghosts of the land itself. It was late autumn when Maggie first saw the lights, not the quick flash of headlights or the creeping glow of a nearby town. No, these lights were different. They were slow and deliberate, like they had somewhere to be, like they were walking toward her step by step. She was parked just off the highway between Civic Drive and the dark mouth of the desert when they appeared. Two lights, yellow and amber, floating in the distance, hovering low over the brush. Not a plane, not a vehicle, just lights moving across the horizon. She'd pulled her camera up to her eye. Just as the shutter clicked, the lights vanished. Not blinked out, not faded, they simply disappeared. There was no wind, no sign of anything natural that would explain them. But Maggie wasn't the kind of person to settle for the unexplainable, not without trying to understand it. The next morning, after the Marfa diner breakfast of too much coffee and greasy eggs, Maggie asked around. The old folks didn't talk much, but they all pointed her in the same direction. She had to head east, into the desert. That's where the real Marfa mystery lived, they said. Out in the land where things seemed to bend and warp under the weight of the sky. By midday, Maggie was deep in the scrub. She passed the old shack, the one that people claimed had been abandoned for decades. The walls were sagging, half collapsed, and it looked like it hadn't seen a soul in years. She made a mental note to come back for photos later. The desert was beginning to feel heavier, the air thin and sharp, like it could cut a man in half if he wasn't careful. Maggie ignored the shiver creeping up her spine, pulled the camera strap over her neck, and ventured deeper. She couldn't explain it, but there was something pulling her. A deep, gnawing sensation at the back of her skull, tugging her toward that shack. She turned on her heel and walked back. When she reached it, the shack seemed smaller than she remembered. The windows were dusty, the door barely hanging on its hinges, but it was quiet. Too quiet. Maggie pulled open the door. The wooden planks groaned under her weight, as if they were aching to speak. Inside it smelled of mildew and earth, but something else lingered in the air like perfume. Faint, sickly sweet, mixed with the desert dust. She stepped over the threshold, camera raised, and began snapping pictures, capturing the decay, the haunting quiet of the place. But it was the walls that started to draw her attention. The cracks in the plaster seemed to pulse like they were alive. Then a soft sound, like a breath, filled the room. Maggie froze. The whisper was faint, like a rustle of paper, but it had a voice, her brother's voice. Maggie's hands shook as she lowered the camera. Her brother Ben had died 2 years ago. A car accident on Interstate 10, just outside of Lubbock. She hadn't even been able to make it to the funeral in time. Ben had always been her protector, her anchor. The thought of hearing his voice again, here of all places, made her blood run cold. But there it was again, a whisper. Maggie? Her name. Clear as day, her heart thudded in her chest. Her feet felt as if they were stuck in quicksand. She took a step toward the wall. Her breath caught in her throat as the voice repeated her name. Maggie! It wasn't just a whisper. It was a call, a plea, a summoning. And then the walls seemed to move, rippling like water disturbed by a stone. Maggie, please! Ben. She stepped forward, unable to stop herself, the camera now hanging limply by her side. The whispering grew louder, but the voice, it was warped, faint, like it was coming from a long distance or maybe from the other side of some invisible curtain. Maggie pressed her palm against the wall. Ben! The whispering stopped, and for a moment she thought it was gone. But then the whisper came again, much louder, more urgent, more demanding. Maggie, help me! The sound echoed through her skull, and she stumbled back, heart racing, sweat beaded on her brow. But the strangest thing happened. The whisper changed. It softened. It turned from the sound of Ben's voice into something darker. The voice twisted into something alien, something hungry. You shouldn't have come, Maggie. You shouldn't have come here. The words were slithering like they were sliding down her spine, making her feel like she was drowning in sound. Maggie couldn't breathe. Her vision began to swim. She turned and tried to run, but the shack seemed to stretch. the walls elongating, the door shifting out of reach. When the sheriff found her hours later, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Maggie was sitting on the desert floor, her camera in her lap. She stared at the shack, her face pale, eyes wide. But there was nothing in the shack. No strange lights, no whispers. Only a lone, empty room. Her camera, however, had a new set of photos on it. But when they developed, there was something else. Something Maggie hadn't seen with her own eyes. In the corner of the last photo, something was standing in the doorway. It wasn't Ben. It was something else. And it was smiling. You can tell a lot about a place by the way it feels before you even walk inside. Some places just have that heaviness to them. Not necessarily a smell or a sound, but a weight in the air. You can feel it as soon as the door clicks shut behind you. Apartment 3B was one of those places. Lauren Carter was a sophomore at the University of Texas when she found the apartment. She had spent her last year of high school living with her aunt in Round Rock, but now that she was on her own, she was eager to dive into the downtown Austin lifestyle. The cheap food trucks, the late-night concerts, the freedom. So when she found the old brownstone on East 10th Street, she jumped at it. The price was too good to be true for a one-bedroom downtown. Just enough for her meager college budget. The landlord, Mr. Bertram, was strange but kind enough. He gave her a short tour, pointed out the rusty heater, and told her about the other tenants. But something in his eyes made her feel like he was holding back. The apartment was everything she needed, just big enough for her bed, her desk, and the bookshelf she filled with used textbooks and novels. The walls were a faded yellow like old parchment, and the floors creaked like they hadn't been walked on in years. But it was clean, and for $400 a month, clean was all she needed. She didn't think much about the peephole. It was old, a little scratched, but perfectly situated right next to the door, right at eye level. At first, Lauren didn't pay it any mind. It wasn't until she'd been living there for a few weeks, long enough to get used to the sound of the trains that passed just outside her window, the low hum of the city, that she began to notice something. It was subtle at first, but there was something about the peephole. She would be walking past the door, coming in from class, her arms full of textbooks or groceries, and she would catch it. A flash of something, a glimmer in the small, circular opening. Eyes. At first, she thought it was her imagination. Maybe the light from the hall was reflecting off the metal. Maybe it was just the way the door warped with age. But every time she passed it, the sensation grew stronger. Someone was watching her. One night, after a particularly long study session, she was getting ready for bed. She had that usual feeling, the one that sat at the back of her mind and nagged at her. She went into the kitchen to grab some water, and when she returned, she caught a glimpse of something, a shadow moving in the peephole. She froze. The shadow was gone in a blink, but there was that feeling again, deep in her stomach, like the ground had slipped beneath her feet. The next morning, she found herself standing at the door, staring at the peephole. She reached out, her hand shaking as she touched the cold brass. Nothing, just darkness, a shadow. But she could have sworn. Just for a second, she saw a pair of eyes staring back at her. That night, Lauren couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her bed, her thoughts racing back to the peephole. The eyes. Around 3 a.m., she woke with a start, her body drenched in sweat. She hadn't realized she'd fallen asleep, but there it was, a muffled sound, distant at first, then louder, a slow, dragging noise. It was coming from outside her door. Her heart pounded in her chest. It sounded like footsteps, slow and heavy, dragging across the old wood. For a moment, she told herself it was just the building settling, the heat turning on. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She grabbed her phone and dialed her mom's number just to hear someone's voice on the other end. But the line was dead. The strange, muffled static was the only sound. That's when she heard it. A whisper, barely audible, but it was clear enough to make her blood run cold. It sounded like it was coming from the other side of the door. Lauren, her name. She stumbled backward, her phone clattering to the floor. Her breath hitched in her throat. She ran to the door and pressed her ear against it, heart hammering. Nothing. No more whispers. No more footsteps. Only the hollow, empty sound of the building settling. But the eyes, they lingered. The next day, Lauren couldn't shake the feeling. She kept glancing over at the peephole, even as she tried to distract herself with assignments and Netflix. But the sensation wouldn't go away. She started researching the building just out of curiosity, maybe a bit of dread. And that's when she found it. In 1987, a man named Ralph Thompson had lived in apartment 3B, a quiet, unremarkable man, except for the fact that he had hanged himself in the very same unit, his body found hanging from a ceiling fan in the middle of the night. No one had known why. No one had heard anything. Just an ordinary man, driven to madness by... What? Lauren shuddered as she read the article. She didn't want to believe it, but something about it felt like a warning. The next few days were a blur. Her classes, her meals, everything felt off. She was living in a haze, caught in the tight grip of a nightmare. That night, after another failed attempt to sleep, she sat by the door. Her gaze was fixed on the peephole, and as she stared, something began to change. The shape behind the hole seemed to warp, bend, as if the very air around it was breathing, and then she saw it. A face. Ralph Thompson's face. Hollow, sunken eyes staring right through the door. His lips parted, a faint whisper escaping his mouth. "Come closer, Lauren." Her skin went ice cold, and her breath caught in her throat. The next day, Lauren packed her things. She didn't call the landlord, didn't make a fuss. She simply left, never looking back at apartment 3B. But as she walked out the front door for the last time, she glanced over her shoulder and saw the peephole staring back at her, the eyes still waiting.